All right, welcome to the edition of Key Ministries Disability Ministry Video Roundtable. And today we're going to talk about bringing back our volunteers and what that's going to look like. And my internet is unstable today, so that's lovely. All right, but what that's going to look like and kind of best practices and all that. And before we get going, I want to remind everybody that this is not a webinar. This is a roundtable, which means we're going to discuss, and I want to hear from everybody. I know we have some folks out there with some really fantastic ideas, some great resources. So this is definitely a discussion where we want to hear from you. Show of hands, or you can give a little thumbs up using the icons on the bottom of your screen. How many of you are back, like your ministry is back with volunteers, either in the building or outside, but with some volunteers of some sort? So it looks like, oh, well, more than half of the folks that are on this call. So how many of you are back in your buildings with your ministry? So about half. Okay, great. All right, well then we are definitely going to be calling on all of you. Okay. So in the description of this roundtable, I did say that we would cover a few things. So I thought we would just jump in that way. For those of you who have brought your volunteers back, can you tell us a little bit about what your best practices are? So what does it look like to be a volunteer in your ministry while COVID is still a thing? Would anybody like to get us started here?
In our ministry, we were just really made sure that everyone understood the reality of what it was going to be like. This was for the parents as well as our volunteers and our church leadership, so we were all on the same page. We talked a lot about everything we would do to try to keep it as safe as possible, but also the realities of what we actually couldn't control. And we made it very clear with our families and our volunteers that if you decide you're not ready to come back yet, that we respect that, there's no pressure, and we would look for ways to keep both of those families and volunteers engaged online. And people really responded well to that, and it's gone really well so far.
All right, good. So can you give us, Barb, a little bit of a picture of kind of what your ministry looks like these days?
Yes, so prior to COVID, we're an in-reach ministry, so our goal is to allow families who have children with special needs in our church to be able to go to service. So we're fairly small. We had like 5 regular kids that come every Sunday. And prior to COVID, we had a buddy ministry where the buddies would go in the classroom with the children. We had about 25 volunteers for all of our positions, serving different amounts each month. When we decided to relaunch, we were one of the first churches to relaunch. We had 5 volunteers come back out of 25. We had more than half of our kids, 3 to 4, come back. So there was no way we could offer the same ministry structure we had before. So we just decided to change things up, and we changed the way we did ministry, and now we're doing a separate classroom where we have 2 volunteers in there, the kids all in there together, and it's been great. We've actually at this point been turning people away that want to volunteer with our ministry, and just, I know, but because it's gone really well, we've been fortunate that our church loves our ministry. We get a lot of support, but we have some really great people that work in the profession in our ministry, and since they are doing such a fabulous job being lead teachers in this classroom, we've just kept the volunteer group small, and then the people who are wanting to join with us now, we are cross-training with special needs and children's ministry and encouraging them to serve in the children's ministry, knowing they can come back with us once we expand. So we just completely changed it, and we told the parents too, we're gonna do hand washing and not share curriculum, and we're gonna do this and this and this and this, but at the same time, we can't guarantee that your children are never gonna touch the same toy, or that we can always keep them 6 feet apart, because you're talking about some children, and then children with developmental disabilities. So they knew, and they could know, yes, I'm okay with that, or no, I'm not. That's how we did it.
All right, great, thank you. So it sounds like half of your students came back and like 20% of your
Yeah,
volunteers.
half of our students came back, and then we actually got a new student since the pandemic started. So we have, we're now, what we're going to do is we're going to go in our general children's ministry. The way they're doing it is by RSVP, because they can only have so many kids. So we're going to now make our class RSVP as well, because we're going to have to limit it to try to keep as much social distancing as possible. And then we continuously equip all of our general ministry, children's ministry volunteers with some basic special needs training so that kids can still go there if they can't be in our classroom.
Okay, great, great. Does anybody else, can anybody else share what, if they do have their classes or whatever it is that your ministry looks like, what that looks like for your volunteers, or what that looks like at your church?
We're outside of Houston, and ours is very similar to what Barb said. Like a fourth of my volunteers came back. Less than half of my kids came back, but we've got visiting families coming almost every week. So,
wow.
And that's kind of a surprise because not everybody lets us know ahead of time. So none of my buddies came back, similar to Barb. So I do have my sensory rooms covered, but not, because a lot of my buddies were teenagers. And so that not all of them are back, and even their schedule changed on Sunday mornings. So we have one paid helper, and we had to add another paid helper so that we have some consistency on Sunday mornings. Because I'm the pastor's wife, and my son James is 13, and he is in our class. So I can't always be there, and so we had to have some consistency. So that's how we have, but we're back into that. We're going to have to train new volunteers. We're going to have to get to know these new kids who are coming and their families. And so it's not like starting totally over, but in a lot of ways it feels like that because it has changed so much. But similar to Barb, we've told the parents we can only do so much. Our volunteers are wearing masks, but the kids aren't required to. We're doing extra cleaning measures. We have individual things of like crayons, like KU, like even little containers for the crayons that have the regular kids' names on it, like the kids who come regularly, so that they're not grabbing crayons. These are your crayons, or the do-a-dots or whatever we're using in the room. So it's a lot. And so I'm hoping we'll be like Barb and get new volunteers and get them trained and get them in. But right now, we're just plugging holes every Sunday, just trying to make it work with the adults who show up and with the kids who I serve show up.
Thank you for sharing. So what I'm hearing so far is, for those of you who have reopened, that you do have fewer volunteers than you had, but you're kind of changing up your ministry structure a little bit so that you can still accommodate the families that are coming. So it sounds like also best practices, the volunteers are wearing masks, you're doing more disinfecting, you are kind of creating individual craft items or whatever, so that, and trying to social distance and keep the toys separate and that type of thing, which I know is kind of a challenge. All right, would anybody else like to share if they're back in the building? I know many of you are not. Just I'm looking around at some faces that I know, and I know that you're not in the building anytime soon. Yes.
Sorry, I have one more thing I wanted to add. Yeah. The other thing that we did was when we relaunched, because it was completely different, we created a social story that explained each step. And so not only did we give that to the parents ahead of time and have it in the room to go over with each child, each of our volunteers read it so that they knew exactly what all the changes were too. So that also helped us to just to have those expectations out there so they don't feel lost or question. So that was a little bit helpful as well.
That's great. So I did want to talk about how you are setting those expectations for your volunteers. And I think a social story is a great way. That way everybody's on the same page. I know that, so our church has been doing outdoor Sunday school, and we did talk about having like something that volunteers had to sign off on. What's the word I'm trying to come up with here? Like a release type of thing.
Waiver or consent.
Thank you, Al. And we ended up not doing that, but we do, for the parents who register their kids, and I'm talking all of children's ministry, they do have to fill out a waiver. But we do require that the volunteers wear masks and that type of thing. And, you know, there were a couple volunteers that that agreed to come and then weren't particularly agreeable about the masking. And we just said, that's our policy. That's, you know, what the session of our church came up with. And so that's what it's going to be. So I think for those of you who are getting ready to relaunch, you do need to make those expectations clear. And whatever your policy at your church is, you need to make sure that you're adhering to that policy throughout, you know, every aspect of your ministry. Would anybody else like to share with how that is your case?
So we're
Chance
reopening.
Unmute here.
We're reopening our display for in-person worship starting on October 4th, but everything's reservation only. And then October 18th, we will resume our children's ministry, our special needs ministry. We've already been meeting during the week anyway. So we kind of have our format and plan, but we are only utilizing staff with our younger children or our more involved participants. We will utilize some with our adults in their Bible study. We are limiting to one worship service a Sunday in the beginning. The good thing about the pandemic is we were offered a special deal through our local TV network. So we are, our other churches may have lost people, but ours has like doubled. So we're averaging about 30,000 a Sunday, even in the summer, which is crazy. And, you know, and then the online presence is, I mean, it's just, we never expected this. But the thing that I wanted to share is, so our Special Needs Awareness Weekend is the last weekend in September. And because we have all of this media coverage now, that's going to go out all around the United States. And so even though like our handbell choir, for instance, will not be performing live, we have so much archive, you know, footage of them, but we will have a family who has 2 children actually with disabilities who will be our scripture readers, and they will get to tell their story, and the whole family will be there. And then we will have, you know, some other elements that will be involved. And our pastor is building his worship service around disability ministry. So that's the blessing of this.
Yes, for sure. So for those of you who have been joining in our weekly or bi-weekly idea shares, you'll know that I'm very excited whenever there's a pandemic blessing. So thank you, Jennifer, for sharing that. That sounds like such a wonderful opportunity for people all over the country. So thank you for that. Wow. All right, anybody else on what their best practices are if you are reopened right now?
Hey, Beth, I don't know if you guys can hear me. So our church was actually kind of unique because we built, they built a pretty massive brand new space just for the disability ministry.
Wow.
And it was supposed to launch, I guess, sometime in April, but obviously coronavirus had something else to say about that. But so I think in one aspect, we were really fortunate that when this happened in a way, because now there's this brand new space. So there was some new rules that were going to be put in place with coming in. Like we would have a single area for the entire family to check in. Like they didn't have to go to one place and check in for, you know, our disability ministry, and then another place to check in somewhere else. So that kind of helped a little bit. But what the church did, they sent out an email to everybody, and just, I thought it was worded really well. It was basically like, hey guys, this is the rules that are coming. Who's comfortable helping out? And then I got reached out to personally because I had been volunteering on a Saturday night, and they weren't doing, still aren't any Saturdays for a while. So everything is Sunday morning, and then they started with adults and teens first. And I think a month later, they started with our children's ministry. They don't do any kind of reservations, but there's pretty much a volunteer to handle every step of the way. There's somebody out front that handles the temperature, and there's a little sticker that you get, a little check mark that, you know, I guess says that you're able to walk around now, whatever. But and then they also have somebody that actually checks you in, the fancy computer system that they got. There's a greeter, and then we have we're actually lucky that we got like a ton of volunteers. So there's normally more volunteers there than we need, I think, which is great. But so there's a lot of people. Yeah, I know it's kind of rare too. I mean, it's like sad there's not like a long line of people dying to help out, but I mean, it's pretty cool. So there's like a handful of folks that are there helping, and then they've this is still taking a little time to learn, but there's definite time blocks, and they aren't letting anybody in until that time starts. So I help out with the first service, and usually that's the teens class that I'm working with, and then the adults come in after that, and some of them are 30 minutes early, and they still have to sit out in the lobby, and they do that. But that gives us time to wipe everything down, and since I lead the teens class, so I like moving all the furniture around because I know where they like to sit. But they've separated all the desks, all the chairs. There's tons of space, but like I said, we're fortunate because they built, it's nuts. It's like almost 5,000 square feet of space, I think, just for the disability ministry. So that helped a lot, but I just thought it was really cool because, like, without saying it, there's like little stations all over the place. So people are moved pretty well throughout our space, and they have also, some people have, snacks were kind of a concern. They didn't, they were used to that. So we've kind of put that off on the security and the medical folks. And we say, hey guys, we'd really like to bring that in, but our security and our medical staff, they're just not letting us do that right now. And that, I hate to say, like, to throw somebody else under the bus, but that's kind of helped too, is to just say, hey, we just can't do this right now. It's just out of our control. And so far, everybody has been really understanding, and there's obviously not as many people have come back. There's a lot of fear still surrounding it. But the folks that come back they love being there. So it's just been really nice to be able to have some in-person stuff again.
That's great. So another thing I'm hearing, Jason, that you shared is that you need to be clear in your communication about what this is going to look like in terms, like you mentioned, the snacks. And, that's another one that I think a lot of gatherings are eliminating the snack time. I know even when we've been doing outdoor Sunday school, we have eliminated the snack time, which was something that we had included back when we were doing indoor Sunday school. I want to kind of shift gears for a little bit, and I know many of you are not back in your buildings. And so your volunteers are not back yet. And I want to talk about how to engage your existing volunteers, meaning your pre-COVID volunteers, in your ministry, even if you're not back in your building doing your thing. So Key Ministry has hosted these weekly idea shares, and this is a topic that we've talked about quite a bit. And we've talked about how important it is to continue to have those touch points with your volunteers and to cast the vision for your ministry, even if you're not gathering in person. So I was hoping that a few of you could share some of the ways you have engaged your volunteers during these last 6 months, even if you haven't been meeting in person.
Well, we have been started with doing monthly newsletters for our special needs ministry, in which I'm including the volunteers in that. In addition to trainings that I'm doing with we actually got some new volunteers amongst this pandemic, which was a blessing to be able to reap in. So those trainings that we're doing, we're including those who are at home via Zoom, so that they're still involved and still being kept up to date as to what's going on.
Okay, great. So how many of you are using Zoom to gather your volunteers on a regular basis? So Doc is saying yes, he does, Bronwyn, a couple others. Okay, great. Can anybody share what that looks like for your ministry?
Well, I can talk, so obviously with everything, we've pretty much have gone virtual with everything that we're doing. We're doing virtual respite nights based on age. And we did a virtual camp. We're doing everything virtual. But with all that, we're inviting our volunteers to be a part of that. And so we've had several of our regular volunteers join, but we've also got new volunteers who have joined with us with that. One thing that we have found, we've partnered with a local university, and they've got their OT and PT students. They are desperate. They have to find clinical experience to work with individuals with special needs. And there is nowhere that they can do that in person right now. So we partnered up with them where they now are helping us out. They're our virtual buddies when we're doing our outreach, or when we're doing our virtual respite. And one of our blessings with the COVID with this is they've loved it so much that they're actually taking the bull by the horn, and they're going to help develop some of our future respite events in the future because it's been so good. And that goes right in with their training with that. So it's just another way that you can bring in other volunteers into your program and do that. One other thing we've done, and Laura Zatorsky on our team is on, God's really laid it on her heart. One thing we have been doing is we have been calling all our families, just checking in on them. Well, Laura's like, why aren't we doing that for our volunteers? So, she's now going through and starting to call our volunteers, text our volunteers, hey, how are you? We're thinking about you. How can we pray for you? What can we do for you? Just letting them know that we're still here for them, and that, we haven't forgotten them. And, even though we don't have a lot of in-person things, and, all the fun things that they really want to do aren't necessarily there yet. It at least is allowing them to know we're still here, even though they're still getting our emails, they know what's going on. But it again makes them be a person. And that's the whole thing that we want them to realize through all this, is that they are a person, they are a family. They're not a number. We don't use them to just fill holes and needs, but they're a part of our family, and we want to make sure we're filling, the needs, we're praying for them. But most importantly with that is we're reminding them what our vision and our mission is. The thing you always have to be concerned about is vision leak on whatever you do. But we've had 6 months now where we've not really had much with the volunteers. So, talk about vision leak, that, instead of having a small drip, it's pull the plug and everything's gone out of the sink. So we've got to pour everything back into the volunteers, remind them why we're doing what we're doing, remind them why we need to get them on board. And, you know, as I'm working with churches throughout the country, it's what I'm hearing here. You know, most of us rely on students. You know, for us, 90% of our volunteers are students. Well, most parents aren't willing to let their students come back to serve yet. So we're going to have to find other ways, other avenues to get volunteers in. So that's why we need to be reaching out to new avenues, finding new ways to get new volunteers until this new normal kind of changes a little bit. But it's thinking out of the box, seeing how you can do things. But the most important thing is just tapping into the volunteers, letting them know they're important, they're a part of you, praying with them. Check up on Facebook. You know, if you see something going on with them, let them know. If you see, you know, a family member sick or something, send them a text. Let them know, hey, you know, sorry to hear that, praying for you, or just respond there on Facebook. Those make big impact for them. It doesn't take a ton of time, but that reminds them, oh, you know, wow, they still remember me. I'm still a part of that. And that's a huge thing to keep them involved.
Great, thank you. So I'm hearing, you know, have those little touch points. So it could be the, you know, old school, the phone call, you know, following up on things that maybe you see on Facebook, including them in the virtual activities that your ministry may be doing. Thank you. And also Doc brought up something, and so I'll just shift gears again just for a second, but there's a good chance that a lot of us are going to need to recruit kind of a new batch of volunteers, or, you know, just at least a few new volunteers. And so he mentioned that he has tapped into a local college, local university, to get some OTs involved. So a few others of you indicated that you have new volunteers since COVID. Where did these volunteers come from? What is attracting them to your ministry, and how did you find them? How did they come to, you know, sign up with you? Would anybody like to share?
Sure. I could jump in if nobody. I can't see the other side of the screen, so if someone wants to talk, so out here in California, we're like miles away from like doing anything that looks normal at all. But the upside of that is there are a lot of mostly students, so I'd say 5th graders and up through college and post-grad that are kind of looking to, good job, Leah, sorry, apparently 1st grade is over for right now. So they're looking for ways to serve, and a lot of them have been recruited by their friends that are already serving. A lot of have been recruited by their siblings who are serving. Am I frozen? I'm not sure. Sorry, can you guys hear me? I'm gonna turn off my video. Am I here? Sorry, okay, I'm gonna just keep talking. Sorry about that. So they've been recruited by their siblings that are serving, they've been recruited by their friends that are serving, recruited by their housemates that are serving. So a lot of people out there are looking for purpose, and this seems to be a good way for them to do it. So it's been word of mouth, and I've certainly taken all the people that want to come. So.
Okay. All right, am I back? Can you guys hear me okay?
I also just wanted to add into what Doc was saying about utilizing the OT students. I'm an occupational therapist as well, and I recently found out that the NBCOT will utilize volunteer hours for continuing education credits. So reaching out to local clinics can also be an avenue to recruit. For every 5 hours of volunteer work, occupational therapists and occupational therapist assistants can earn one credit hour. And over a 3-year period of time, they can earn 18 credits for certification renewal.
Okay, that's a great Great tip to know.
Yes.
So hopefully everybody made note of that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on what Bronwyn said, that so she's getting new volunteers by kind of word of mouth from existing volunteers sharing the opportunity with maybe siblings or housemates or whatever it may be. And that's wonderful. And it also speaks to the fact that she is continuing to cast the vision of her ministry. Because folks would not be looking to get involved if they weren't, you know, continuing to, if it wasn't front of mind for the existing volunteers. So kudos to you, Bronwyn. All right, who else would like to share about either ways they're involving their existing volunteers, or how they have been able to reach out to kind of a new pool of volunteers?
I can add again. Sorry, I'm chatty today. I think what's really been helpful for us is that since we are one of the churches that is back open, a lot of churches in our area, I'm in Columbus, Ohio, are still meeting online. So we're actually getting quite a few new families each week for people that want to be back. And that's where our new people wanting to volunteer are coming from. So the most important thing, I think, is just to make sure it's easy for people to get information on how they volunteer, and to work with all of your other church leaders so that you can kind of direct people into their fit. And that's how we've got people, was they wanted to be part of the children's ministry. We have all of our descriptions for our ministry, and we work together. So it wasn't so much we went out looking as much as we made it easy to find.
Mm-hmm. So that's a really good point. And I want, for those of you who are on, I think it was last month's disability ministry, talked about making our websites accessible and also what content to include. And I think that's a perfect example of having up-to-date contact, like what is actually going on at your church, what your ministry looks like, even during COVID. That can be a great recruiting tool. So thanks for bringing that up. While we're talking with Barb, and while we're talking about recruiting and training, I'd like for all of us to share the resources that you use when you train volunteers. And I know Barb has some really great resources, so I thought maybe we'd start with you, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay, so we, in June, launched a new online training ministry for special needs ministry called Wonderful Works. And so if you or anyone you know is interested in getting some really short, kind of quirky training videos, please check out wonderfulworks.net. Each week we post a new module in our Facebook group that goes over another aspect of special needs ministry. And just so you know, our specialty really is working with churches who don't have formal special needs ministries yet, and working with churches who don't have a budget to hire someone. So in our network, we're trying to link people like you guys who have experience and resources with churches that don't have that yet. But this week we did actually happen to have the same topic as this, which is recruiting, as well as how to recruit during the pandemic. So if you guys would like kind of check out and see what we are looking at our church, I would invite you to wonderfulworks.net and take a look.
All right, thank you. That's very, very timely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to jump over to the chat for a second. So Bronwyn shared that they've also tried to make serving really fun for volunteers. And if you know Bronwyn, I believe that that is happening. So they've chalked encouraging messages on families' driveways, done social distance surprise birthday celebrations for the kids, dropped off cookies, candy, and stickers. And their volunteers, particularly youth volunteers, have had a lot of fun creating and connecting. So those are some really great ideas. If you're not in kind of back in your, whatever your traditional Sunday school setting is, these are ideas that some of your volunteers might be really, really into helping with, even if they're not ready to come back in a classroom. And so that is a smart way to continue to engage your volunteers. And so that someday when they are ready to come back in the classroom, they are still very much involved in the heart of your ministry. So not only does that serve the students and the families, but it serves the volunteers as well. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, Doc.
Yeah, so back for the training and everything, we with SOAR, we created a training. When I initially was doing ministry, we started a training that I had a lot of people help me write and thought it was fantastic training. Went the next weekend, saw volunteers dealing with behavior and were deer in the headlight, couldn't respond to it. And so I'm like, okay, that training stunk. It doesn't work. And so I went to my background as a physician. The way we learn anything in medicine is through case-based learning. And so I scrapped that training. I took everything we had and rewrote it and converted it into 10 case scenarios that any volunteer would see in a weekend. And so we teach that now in about an hour and 15 minutes, in which after they go through it, they talk through it, and after they come out of that training, they're completely ready to handle anything. And we've just seen a huge improvement with that, high success with it. We've got, a couple hundred churches throughout the country using it as well. We've got video of it up on our YouTube page, SOAR Special Needs. And once the Wonderfully Made conference is done, and I'll be presenting that at Wonderfully Made, but then after the conference, we'll be packaging that together to be able to make it more accessible for churches as well. I just haven't had a chance to try to get that done yet with trying to get Wonderfully Made up and
You have
going.
a few things going on right now.
I've got just my hands in a few things right now. But we want to make that more available for churches to be able to use. But it's been very successful where, it helps. The other thing that I want to say that is important with training is you can't do a one-time training. You have to have a continual training. And so I always recommend a quarterly training. Now, here's the other thing I've learned with that. Never call it training. Never, ever call it training, because you're not going to get your volunteers to it. So what I termed it was a gathering. We have our winter gathering, our spring gathering, our fall gathering, and gathering sounds fun. And we made it into more of a party type thing and a family time where 75% of it was spent on, socializing with one another, maybe snacks, maybe a meal, games. But guess what? Every single game, all the themes, everything we did had to deal with what that training piece was going to be. So if we were going to do, for instance, a training on how to deal with a nonverbal child in the classroom, we played the telephone game with that. And we would have to do other things in preparing for that. So those are important things that you need to do. And I found if you do them as gatherings and never say that there's training with it, you get a much higher success rate with people actually showing up and coming to it and loving it. If you say, come to our training, even if you say it's a mandatory training, volunteers just aren't going to come. They don't think they need to do it because they've already learned it. They already were trained once. But you really need to have them updated. So try to do at least, if you can, quarterly, minimum, I would say twice a year. But find things that would really help sharpen their tools and their toolbox, dealing with behaviors, anything that would help them out through that. So those are things that we encourage, and we assist other churches in doing all those trainings as well. So.
Great, thank you. So you can go to soarspecialneeds.org for more information about Doc's training and also for the Wonderfully Made conference. So that's coming up in October, and registration is open for that right now. All right. Who else wants to talk about training, vision casting, or is just really struggling right now? That that you need volunteers, or that you're going to be back in the building soon and you don't have the volunteers. Maybe we can all talk you through it.
Can I add something just really quickly off of what Doc said?
Absolutely.
We found the exact same thing, Doc, that if you call it training, nobody comes. And so you work on this big, great gathering and 5 people get it. We approach it a little bit differently than you do. We actually do 5-minute trainings before each service. So when we get our volunteers come into our huddle, that's when we do our training, and we just do like one quick bare bones thing at a time. And we found that has been a good way to equip all of the children's ministry volunteers a little at a time.
That's great. Thank you. What do you call it anything, or do you just like throw it in during the huddle time?
We just call it the huddle. And I mean, we're not a huge church. We have maybe 600 people a weekend. And so everybody kind of knows everybody. So they just know it's coming and it's fine.
Anybody else?
Yeah, and I'll just jump on that. The important thing for every church is to find what works for you. You know, every single church is different. Every single ministry is different. And it's vital that you find what works for you and what works for your volunteers. And so that's going to be vital. At the same time, you know, what we have, you know, 20, 30 people on here. Nobody's doing ministry the same way. Ministry is done in every church is differently, because you need to make it for your church. So it's important that you find what's right for you and in your ministry with that. So, you know, don't try to feel like you have to force someone else's to make it fit for you. It's finding, you know, what works for you. And again, you know, there's people like, you know, Barb, myself, and many others out there who are happy to help you, you know, through that and make things adjust.
Yes, for sure. And we have lots of different sizes of churches represented on this today, right now. So that I love that, because that, I think that really helps all of us as we kind of consider different strategies and different techniques. Having a variety of church sizes and ministry models represented, I think, is really helpful. All right, look, oh, we're running out of time here.
So Beth,
any other, yes. Yeah,
just
Jennifer.
a quick thing. You were asking about vision casting. And so because we currently have 5 campuses and each one has kind of been like their own island. We've written a playbook, and so each campus will have guidelines, if you will, to what programming is going to look like. Each campus does not have a special needs ministry director, so really that is my job to make sure that whatever is offered here at our main campus is offered at the other campuses as needed, because we range from, you know, our smallest churches about 800 to, well, what I mentioned earlier about our main campus and then the overall. But what I have found is really important, I don't call myself the special needs director. I call myself the sales and marketing director, because if you are wanting to get everybody on board, and I know there's some really fun people on this call, and it's just me because I'm a bit out there, but I am so excited when I'm talking about stuff that, you know, one of our executive directors he finally says, just tell me what you want me to say yes to. That's what you just tell me what I need to say yes to, because, you know, our adult programming is what's really growing for us. I think our children's ministry does a really good job of working with most of our kiddos with disabilities, but there's such a gap for the adults. And especially because they need socialization as well as meaningful activities to do and to be fully engaged in the life of the church. So this is our mission when everything goes back to whatever it's going to be, is to really, so we have a bakery at our main campus, which is part of our day program, but we are ready to launch our next, well, we want to call it a pie and coffee shop at one of our other campuses. And so not every campus is going to look the same in what they are offering, but there will be meaningful engagement for every campus for our adults, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, and that's the vision right there, the meaningful engagement. And that might look different in different campuses. I know
Right.
several of you are on multi-campus or part of multi-campus churches, several of you on this call today. But I think, yeah, that meaningful engagement, that's the vision. That's what you want for everybody. And so and how that's going to look at each place is going to be a little bit different. Yeah. Yeah, that's exciting. I would say yes to you as well, Jennifer. Whatever you asked, I would say yes. You've got a passion.
It's just easier. It makes your life better to just say yes. Right, Doc?
All right. Any other thoughts, questions?
Sylvia has her hand raised.
Oh, hello, Sylvia. What's up?
Just want to share, during this time, we've been trying to keep our volunteers engaged just by sending out emails, and we did a newsletter once just with sharing what's going on in the ministry. And when we talked about the vision casting piece, just going back and getting people to understand who they are right now. So 1 month we did a training on learning and understanding the spiritual principle of lamenting, that to understand how you feel right now during this time, because you can't help anybody else unless you are ready to help yourself and know where you are spiritually and how spiritually connected you are to God in and through this process. And Saturday we will have another training where we're going to talk about spiritual gifts and temperaments and understanding your part and the position that you can play as a team player through the understanding of what your spiritual gifts are and what your temperament is and how you can work cohesively as a group. So during this time that we're in COVID, we're going to be really working on building scaffolding so that people begin to understand where they are and who they are and what they're doing and how they can be a more effective part of the ministry. Because, you know, like I said the other day, it's going to be 2022 before we get back in church. Because our pastor has said, we're not going back in until everybody has a place, can take a part, feel comfortable, knowing that some people may not be comfortable for a long time, but want to make sure and not having to make that decision about what percentage of people can come back. And we are doing things virtually now, and everything that we do is virtual. So it's just beginning to understand and learn the context of where everybody is.
Okay, it looks like Beth isn't showing up. Is she showing up for anybody else? No. Okay. Oh, wait. It's telling me she's back.
She just came back in, or
Okay.
slowly coming back on.
Okay.
She's back.
I have never been kicked off of my own call so many times in my life. I think this is like the 7th time. Wow. So I only heard half of what Sylvia said, but I'm sure it was phenomenal. And maybe you said this, but for those of you who don't know, Sylvia's ministry is not going back anytime soon. So the fact that she is pouring into volunteers at this point, I think is just wonderful, because they're not, you know, you're not going to return to normal anytime soon. So, wow. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and close this because this is not, my technology is not working today. So thank you all for joining today. Thank you for the comments in the chat, which now I can't even access. But I appreciate all of you. I encourage you to continue to check in with Key Ministry, visit our events page and see what our next things coming up are. I know a lot of you know about our online pastors retreat, and I'd love for you to share that with your pastor. And, let's just continue to have these conversations. I'm looking for topics for what you'd like to talk about next month. So go ahead and email beth@keyministry.org. And I look forward to seeing you again next month. So my disappearing act through Roundtable today. Thanks.